Basically, once the new emotions arrive, these are officially titled our antagonists. They're not evil.
As I just said in my last video, which did fantastically by the way, thank you every single last person that watched it, emotions are not evil, but they are indeed antagonists. And although I'm going to be specifically talking about the title of this video, Embarrassment, envy and ennui, if you want a video about that, get this video to, let's say, 250 likes, and then I will do it. The idea that Embarrassment is an antagonist is a little weird to think about, because he's not necessarily the antagonist that you look at Anxiety and think of, because Anxiety is a much different thing. She's ethical in her way of being an antagonist. But the idea of Embarrassment is that Embarrassment is a sympathetic antagonist. He's not the best character. He's doing things for Anxiety, aka the antagonist of the movie, but he's also pretty sympathetic in his role. And in the end, spoiler alert, he does become a lot more comfortable with joy, sadness, fear, anger, and disgust, and actually becomes one of the protagonists for maybe even Inside Out 3 if that ever happens. This is basically what happens with all the other emotions too, even anxiety. But throughout the movie, we're kind of rooting for Embarrassment. He's the only emotion really in headquarters after they throw all the other emotions out that's actually pretty likable. And is this because he helps sadness? Well, yeah, that is definitely something about it. But let's take in mind the fact that Embarrassment is the one that hugs all of them and puts them in the jar. He is the one that does this action, not under Anxiety telling him to, but because he's following along with what every other emotion in the headquarters thinks, besides the main five. This tells us that Embarrassment agrees with what Anxiety is trying to do. Her plan is something that he also supports, and this is why he's the one that hugs them all and throws them out. But why does the audience kind of grow on Embarrassment? Well, it's a kind of complicated idea. Believe it or not, I can actually relate Embarrassment and Goldilocks from Puss in Boots: The Last Wish together, because they're both sympathetic antagonists that are doing bad things, yes, but also have a good reason to be doing this. And then sitting with the characters, you kind of realize what they're trying to do, what their thought process is, and that they actually are trying to do something for the greater good that, although goes against the protagonists, are doing something that can genuinely help. But again, just like my previous video, Goldilocks from Puss in Boots: The Last Wish is a harder idea to kind of explain. So talking about Embarrassment is actually much easier and better to understand of how to make a sympathetic antagonist. A sympathetic antagonist is something that's much different than an actual antagonist and much easier to screw up than an actual antagonist or a protagonist, since they do bad things, but the audience also understands why they're doing this and actually view it as the movie goes on as a good thing. Something that I can come up with that is a horrible example of how to make a sympathetic antagonist is Falcon and the Winter Soldier. The antagonists in this show are supposed to be sympathetic, but the audience never really feels that. It only views them as a villain, not even an antagonist. And well, why is this? Well, they kind of cause terrorism, and they kill people that are completely innocent, and they do bad things against the world, which, if you haven't watched my last video, is what villains do. Antagonists are directly opposing the protagonist or protagonists. And that this is a good idea of that it's really hard to make a sympathetic antagonist because they're doing bad things, but they also can't do too bad of things, but they also still have to do bad things because you want to make them an antagonist, but also you want to make them against the heroes instead of against the world. So it's really hard to do this, and if that did not make sense of what just came out of my mouth, that's exactly what I'm getting at. It's really hard to do this. There are so many factors that come into play when you're making an antagonist, and to make that antagonist sympathetic along the way is much harder. So when we have Embarrassment starting off to be something that makes Riley feel a bad emotion, and then all of a sudden kidnaps the original 5 emotions, and then is the one to kidnap them and throw them into the jar, that's something that sets up Embarrassment as an antagonist against the protagonists. We initially don't see anything good about him until we get farther into the movie, when we realize that Embarrassment, although he agrees with Anxiety, thinks that anxiety doing her job is not really doing the job that he'd want it to be like. And this, despite every single last piece of fan art that I've ever seen with sadness and embarrassment, you people are disgusting. Oh my god! This is how you do it. Now let's remove the fact that maybe there's some chemistry between sadness and embarrassment, and let's just kind of separate that from what I'm about to say. Embarrassment over the movie kind of realizes that joy, sadness, anger, disgust, and fear actually have a really key important part with Riley, and that anxiety's plan, although something that he supports, is not really being done the way he wants it to be, and he realizes that over time, that maybe this is not the best thing for Riley. He's not a talking character, he's too embarrassed to speak up. He doesn't have that type of confidence, so he can't actually let his emotions of what's happening kind of come out of his mouth. And all of a sudden, recognizing sadness is in headquarters, he actually decides to help her because he realizes that she might be the key to get the emotions back. And that after seeing what anxiety has done to Riley so far, he's not really in agreement with that. And this is how he starts to be sympathetic, because he actually starts to help the protagonist, the people that we are rooting for, even if it's going against what he believes. And that we start to realize that he's not the same antagonist like anxiety is, and that he actually wants something good for Riley in the way that anxiety is trying to pitch it. But he realizes that anxiety is not doing a good job of actually executing this, and that helping sadness, he realizes that he can actually get what he wants, but with working together with all the emotions and not just having anxiety dictate everything that's going on in Riley's head, which is something that, later comes up and is like the metaphor for the movie. But, I'm not like the explanation for the entire movie, so you can go watch another video about that. This is about embarrassment. And just like Goldilocks from Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, we start to realize that these characters aren't actually as bad as they were in the beginning. And as we start to realize their motives and what they actually want, we start to kind of sympathize with them and realize that even though that they are going against what the protagonist or the heroes want, they do have something that is good, and in no means represent something like the other antagonist of the movie. And to wrap it all up, Embarrassment is a sympathetic antagonist. He's being shown in the beginning that he's not really the best person out there. But that doesn't make him evil or bad. He's just doing something that he thinks is right. But over time, he starts to realize something that maybe the audience didn't realize about him in the beginning, and that he actually has a lot more heart than you'd think. And the audience actually figures out that he actually knows what's good and what's bad, and this is why he helps sadness to stop anxiety, to realize that there is a much better way of tackling things that still goes for his way. Thank you everybody for watching. I'm Enchanted. Bye.